It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
The Orwellian reality we are all living in continues to manifest. Consider this timeless quote from H.L. Mencken. The men the American people admire most extravagantly are the most daring liars. The men they detest most violently are those who try to tell them the truth. A timeless quote. Question. How many in America and other first world nations have made the decision to remain, quote, comfortably oblivious? A term I thank my friend Stephen O'Neill for coining. Even with the dire environmental collapse headlines coming in from all over the globe, so far, few have paid much attention. Perhaps this new headline report from USA Today will hit home. Here it is. Trouble brewing, question mark. World's most popular coffee species at risk of extinction due to global warming. No mention of the climate engineering factor, of course. From this report, about 60% of the world's wild coffee species are at high risk of extinction, a new study states. According to the new research, coffee species are facing a wide range of threats, from increasing numbers of droughts to faster spreading of fungal pathogens as global temperatures rise. The results showed that 75% of wild coffee species are considered threatened with extinction, which is one of the highest recorded threat rates for any plant species. No mention of climate engineering and the highly toxic fallout starting with aluminum that is in precipitation. We know this from lab tests around the globe, and we know that this is killing beneficial soil microbes, which then allows fungal proliferation. It toxifies roots. No mention, because academia is paid not to mention that. And this is only an example. For those that might not be concerned about anything else than not being able to get their morning cup of coffee. That's a sad state in humanity. Many dire headlines to cover in this broadcast. They're coming too fast and too furious to completely cover here, but I will do my best. And why are some of these headlines coming to light now? Because the mainstream media corporate propaganda machine can no longer hide certain realities. Breaking headlines in a moment. First, these few announcements. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour, episode 180 for January 19th, 2019. This commercial-free program is brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org and paid for by geoengineeringwatch.org. This news hour is broadcast throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Saturday mornings from 6 to 7, and now Sunday mornings also from 6 to 7. Global Alert News is also rebroadcast on the East Coast by the PRN Radio Network Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Recordings of this broadcast can be found at geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent top stories and radio sections. If you're aware of any radio station that may be willing to pick up the commercial-free Geoengineering Watch News Hour, please let us know. And we need help with the contacting of these stations. I have a lot of people sending us messages as to suggesting certain stations, but we simply have not enough manpower, not enough resources, not enough time to do these contacts ourselves or to arrange them. But if they can be arranged, we will gladly provide the downloads of our broadcast to other stations for free. Very simple for them to deal with our broadcast, exactly 55 minutes every week, like clockwork. We just simply need help getting this broadcast out. We know several other stations have picked it up thanks to activists in the field. We need all the help we can get to overcome the ever-worsening social media censorship of any credible data that's being put out. That's what the power structure pays social media to do in the end. We need help getting around that censorship. Help us get this program on the air in other places. If you're in the Reading area, free geoengineeringwatch.org informational materials can be picked up from Orchard Nutrition. For those not in the Reading area, the latest geoengineeringwatch.org awareness-raising materials can be ordered from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. This week's Gem Fair event, Gem Fair, G-E-M-F-A-I-R-E. Staunch ally in the fight to expose and halt climate engineering. This week's event, San Rafael, California, January 18th through January 20th, Marin Center Exhibit Hall. If you're near the Gem Fair events, You can get in free if you're there to pick up geoengineeringwatch.org materials to help us sound the alarm. Let the ticket booth know why you're there. Next event for Jim Fair, Roseville, California, February 1st through February 3rd at, quote, The Grounds, February 15th through 17th, Santa Barbara, California, Earl Warren Showgrounds. You can search the Jim Fair home site, find out where their events are, show up, get materials, help us to raise awareness while it can still make a difference. The most complete geoengineeringwatch.org presentation ever produced was posted on Tuesday, January 1st at 12 p.m. This is a geoengineering A to Z presentation. It can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. If you're not familiar with this issue, if you watch that full presentation, you'll know much more than you wanted to know. But what you need to know is there. Final two short announcements. On February 7th, 2019 at 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. at the University of Missouri St. Louis, there will be a climate engineering educational event. The name of the event is Consequences of Climate Change and Climate Engineering. Geoengineeringwatch.org will be supplying educational materials to this event for free. I will be Skyping in for a Q&A discussion after the screening at the event. Search the comment threads for this broadcast post and others. We will have the link to the educational page on this event posted there. I'll arrange that. Final announcement, Spanish-speaking section on geoengineeringwatch.org. We have a very extensive and growing Spanish translation section. It's on the top left of the home page. Please pass that on. Help us to circulate that. Extremely important to reach our Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters. I wish to express my deepest and most sincere gratitude to Ludovico and Pablo for their tireless work from South America putting together these translations. Before covering the latest breaking extremely dire headlines, I want to send this message to the Extinction Rebellion groups growing around the globe. Here's the question. How can you claim to be fighting for the planet when you're not addressing the single greatest threat to the planet, the global climate engineering insanity? Please face the whole truth, tell the whole truth. And I am in no way denying all the other forms of anthropogenic or human damage to the planet. I have always covered that. I lectured on anthropogenic climate change before I elected to focus all on climate engineering because it's a superseding factor and you cannot have a legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without addressing climate engineering first. So please face the whole truth. That's all I'm asking. A few quick headlines of economic reality. Global Ponzi meltdown / house of cards / deflationary collapse. 34 trillion. U.S. government debt bomb much higher than Americans realize. That's the reality of it. Card house. Want to remind everyone, when the biosphere collapses, when the environment collapses, civilization will collapse. It is collapsing. Another headline. Italian banks face 2019 funding crunch without ECB help. Another headline. Canadian home prices fall for third month in a row, even in Vancouver. Another headline. Australian home prices are still falling into 2019. Another headline. Russia to overtake Germany as world's 5th largest economy. The scales are tilting rapidly for many reasons. Much of the world has had enough of the U.S. empire's trail of decimation around the globe, and that's simply the fact of the matter. And this is not to condone other countries. The proportionate amount of destruction is directly related to the size of the military-industrial complex involved. The U.S. military is bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. In fact, nearly half, nearly 50% of all global military expenditures is the U.S. Another headline. Apple is reportedly planning to cut back on its hiring as iPhone sales weaken. Another headline. Online student lender Common Bond lays off 18% of its staff. Another headline. Nissan to cut up to 700 contract workers in Mississippi. These are just examples. I could go on and on and on. The notion that the economy is thriving is a total facade. It's kept afloat with printed fiat money from the criminal central bankers that are the ones actually running our government, our criminal government. That's nothing more than a criminal cabal, has been run by central bankers for a very, very long time, and those who control the central bankers. Now, let's take a good, long, sobering look at reality. What's happening that will affect all of our futures in unimaginably dire ways in the very, very near term. Here's a new headline report addressing the completely collapsing web of life. It's just been published. This report should be an extremely sobering wake-up call for all of us, most especially to all those that have so far labeled anyone that has tried to bring to light what is unfolding as, quote, alarmists. Question: is it, quote, alarmist to point out that if the insects perish, the human race will soon follow? No. No, such a conclusion is not alarmist. It's a scientifically verifiable fact. Here's the headline: Insect collapse. Quote, we are destroying our life support systems. Scientist Brad Lister returned to Puerto Rican rainforest after 35 years to find 98% of the ground insects had vanished. 98%. The report's authors stated this: we knew something was amiss in the first couple of days. We were driving into the forest, and there were no birds. There was nothing. Scientist Brad Lister's return to the rainforest in Puerto Rico after 35 years was to reveal an appalling discovery. The insect population that once provided plentiful food for birds throughout the mountainous national park had collapsed. On the ground, 98% had gone. Up in the leafy canopy, 80% had vanished. The most likely culprit, by far, is global warming. That's a lie. Not that global warming isn't real, but the highly toxic climate engineering fallout, the destroyed ozone layer, there are other factors that academia is not acknowledging. It's not acknowledging. I want to continue from this report. Lister said it was just astonishing. Before, both the sticky ground plates and canopy plates would be covered with insects. This is before, 35 years ago when they were there. You'd be there for hours picking them off the plates at night. But now, the plates that collect the insects would come down after 12 hours in the tropical forest with a couple of lonely insects trapped or none at all. Lister said this: it was a true collapse of the insect populations in the rainforest. We began to realize this is terrible, a very, very disturbing result. But tell the whole truth, Mr. Lister, and the rest from academia. Acknowledge the climate engineering assault. The greatest and most immediate assault on the entire web of life, the greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm. Tell the whole truth. I want to state this. When I first moved to the forest in Northern California in 2001, the first spring on top of the mountain on which I and my family live was covered with caterpillars. Our home was covered with caterpillars. There were so many dragonflies, ladybugs, grasshoppers, and of course, moths and mosquitoes. I've not found a single caterpillar in the last 2 years. Not one. There were countless birds that always woke me at the crack of dawn on top of our mountain. Now there's only eerie silence. And how few have stopped to notice. Now I'm forced to spread birdseed out every day or so that the few that are hanging on don't starve. I feel compelled to try and take care of them. Another question: why did it take academia nearly a decade to acknowledge the insect collapse conclusion that, as I have stated previously, geoengineeringwatch.org sounded the alarm about nearly a decade ago? Why the delay? Here's why: because academia has become a tool for the power structure to pacify populations until the last possible moment. Academia now only discloses dire threats when those threats can no longer be hidden. And even now, with this truly apocalyptic insect collapse report, one of many in recent months, is there any acknowledgement whatsoever of the climate engineering factor that is at the core of the insect collapse? No mention. No mention of the extreme UV radiation factor due to our decimated ozone layer, geoengineering again being a core causal factor there. And most importantly, as I stated, no mention of the highly toxic heavy metals and chemicals that are raining down through our atmosphere. Highly toxic fallout from the ongoing climate engineering operations. What is a primary element used by the climate engineers? Aluminum. With that in mind, consider the next headline report from Reuters and other sources. Alcoa beats profit estimates on strength in alumina segment. The aluminum manufacturers. Despite collapsing economies, they're doing fine. Imagine that. Countless global economies and industries are struggling or collapsing, as I stated. All the while, aluminum sales are going strong. Was it a coincidence that aluminum futures went through the roof after the Copenhagen Climate Conference and the Cancun Climate Conference? No coincidence. The climate conferences are a sham that is used to mask the fact that these gatherings are used to further push the agenda of the climate engineers and the countries that control them. All countries are either actively or passively participating with this insanity, with some exceptions, like those countries that are being targeted by the military-industrial complex, such as Iran, that is not participating, not condoning Iran, but I'm stating they are not participating with this insanity, and they are not the threat they're being made out to be. How many of these scenarios do we have to go through? From Vietnam to Iraq and countless others in between, the false flags, the propagandistic demonization, the weapons of mass destruction that never existed in the first place, and yet country after country is taken down, the resources stripped from them, and all the while, how many Americans are blindly waving their flags, believing the lie that their military is spreading freedom and democracy around the globe? It couldn't be further from the truth. I'm begging our military brothers and sisters to wake up. Take a good long look at what you're participating in. It is not freedom and democracy. Let's change gears to the home front. What's happening at home that we're not being told about from the news site phys.org and numerous other sources. More factors that few are discussing. A $3 billion problem. Miami-Dade septic tanks are already failing due to sea level rise. Yes, sea levels are in fact rising because ice is melting. Very simple problem. No matter how many deny it, it's not rationally deniable. From this report, Miami-Dade has tens of thousands of septic tanks, and a new report reveals most are already malfunctioning, the smelly and unhealthy evidence of which often ends up in people's front yards and homes. A $1 billion problem that climate change is making worse. That's a huge deal for a developed country in 2019 to have half of the septic tanks not functioning for part of the year, said Miami Waterkeeper Executive Director Rachel Silverstein. Sea level rise is pushing the groundwater even higher, eating up precious space and leaving the once dry dirt soggy. Wastewater doesn't filter like it's supposed to in soggy soil. In some cases, it comes back out, turning, again, in a front yard into a septic swamp. Not too good for the real estate industry in Florida, is it? It's going to increase rapidly and radically. Another headline from the publication Esquire.com and other sources, this new report to consider. The term drought is, quote, out of date for the American Southwest. They call it aridification now. For that report, after 19 years of drought and increasing demand, federal water managers project a 52% chance that the river's biggest reservoir, this is the Colorado River, Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam, will fall low enough to trigger cutbacks under agreements governing the system. 7 states saw this coming years ago and used Colorado River Water Users Association meetings in December 2007 to sign a 20-year guideline plan to share the burdens of a shortage. Contingency agreements would update that pact running through 2026. They call for voluntary using less to keep more water in the system's 2 main reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Climate engineering, climate engineering, climate engineering. That is the single greatest drought-causing factor on the planet today, period. If you want to know more about that, go to geoengineeringwatch.org and search engineering droughts. Learn what you didn't perhaps want to know, but need to know. On that note, to footnote on the epic wildfires occurring around the globe, in this case, this footnote is in regard to the fires in California. PG&E is being scapegoated for the fires to cover the tracks of the climate engineers. This is not to say that the ignition source didn't come from a PG&E problem. It may have, the ignition source, but the template on which these wildfires are occurring is absolutely, positively a result of climate engineering operations for many, many reasons. I do not have time to cover all that here. I have too many breaking headlines to cover. Again, go to the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org and search on the top toolbar, engineering wildfires. More than enough data there to make clear climate engineering is the core causal factor behind the wildfires. That is not to deny anthropogenic climate change. Again, for all those who think dichotomously, I'm simply saying this massive factor that's not being acknowledged needs to be acknowledged by especially all those quote-unquote environmental groups and all those who claim to care about the environment that are yet ignoring this massive elephant in the equation, the elephant in the sky. Wildfires will continue, by the way. They are being used for part of the climate engineering agenda. Learn more. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org. From the news site sfgate.com, this new report, Gavin Newsom's budget calls for a new tax on drinking water. California Governor Gavin Newsom is proposing a new statewide water tax. In this newly released 2019 budget, Newsom calls for the creation of a, quote, safe and affordable drinking water fund that would, quote, enable the State Water Resource Control Board to assist communities, particularly disadvantaged communities, in paying for the short-term and long-term costs of obtaining access to safe and affordable drinking water. Gavin Newsom, just another cog in the criminal wheel. As I've mentioned in previous broadcasts, I had a personal meeting with Gavin Newsom at the Capitol in Sacramento with his top aide, presented irrefutable data on climate engineering, which they have categorically ignored and pretended they don't know about. They did not deny this data in the meeting because it's not deniable. But yet, they carry on as if there's nothing going on in our skies. These people are criminals. They're criminals, make no mistake about it. The whole system is bought, sold, and paid for, and so is every so-called elected official in it. Criminals. And if we can bring climate engineering to light, all those who knew and did nothing should be held as accomplices in these crimes, including Governor-elect Gavin Newsom. In Nuremberg-type trials, that's where these people should be held accountable by an awakened population. It's up to all of us to awaken the population, by the way, and we need to do that quickly. We are running out of time. Moving on, yet another headline example of willful poisoning of populations. This is a headline from RT TV and many other sources. Israel accused of ruining Palestinian crops by spraying pesticides along Gaza border. From this report, the Israeli military has been and is spraying chemical agents that include glyphosate, or Roundup, which has been declared a carcinogen by the World Health Organization and banned in many countries around the world, though not here. In many of our foods, part of our own government's willful contamination of our own population as well. Let's ask that question. Is the U.S. population being treated any differently than the Palestinians, than the Yemenis population, which is, by the way, being genocided by the tyrannical U.S. ally, brutal dictatorship, Saudi Arabia? To be clear, the U.S. population is just as expendable to those in power as the rest that are being brutalized around the world. To be even more clear, the heavily armed U.S. population is in fact a rapidly increasing liability to those in power. Consider that. Consider this also. Our rain is toxic, period. The particulate pollution in our air from the climate engineering fallout is highly toxic, period. We have lab tests from around the country to prove it's coming down in our air column. We are breathing it. Every associated human disease and ailment expected to show up with this type of exposure is showing up. The climate engineers have been busy engineering winter weather warfare and weather whiplash scenarios in many parts of the most populated first world nations, most especially. This not only creates mass distraction and public confusion on the true state of the climate, it mires populations in immediate difficulties and thus keeping them from being able to focus on the bigger picture. Here's some headlines along this theme. Europe shivers amid record snowfall and low temperatures. Another headline from DW News Germany, this parallel report. Record snowfall sets Alps in state of emergency. From that report, Austria and Germany are struggling to cope with the heaviest snowfall in 2 decades. At least 17 people have died in alpine regions in the past week. Authorities are warning the risk of avalanches in the mountainous extremely high in the mountainous regions. Some communities in Bavaria have declared a state of emergency. Forecasters warn more snow is on its way. Well, how could it be warm in a world like that, right? That's exactly what the climate engineers want you to think. Another headline from news.com. Stick with me through this broadcast. We'll get to what's happening around the rest of the world that we're not hearing on our corporate media Ministry of Propaganda reports. From news.com.au and other sources, this parallel headline. Athens, famous monuments covered in snow as Europe shivers through freezing temperatures. Temperatures in Greece have dropped to negative 23 degrees C as Europe is blanketed by snow, leaving several dead, hundreds of flights canceled. Let's bounce back to the U.S. for another extremely anomalous so-called winter phenomenon. This one from newscientist.com and many other sources. This is a red flag headline of chemical ice nucleation and the scenarios it can create. Here's the headline. Huge spinning ice disk in river provides a carousel for ducks. The report states this. Freezing weather has brought a surprising new feature to the town of Westbrook in Maine. An enormous circle of ice has formed in the Presumpscot River in the middle of the town. The disk was estimated to be 90 meters in diameter. It is slowly rotating counterclockwise manner like a frozen carousel. This is chemical ice nucleation. Doesn't anybody wonder when such phenomenon has never historically been seen other than recent decades? And now we see it more and more because more and more chemical ice nucleating elements are being dumped on us in cloud moisture, just like the frozen ice balls in Lake Michigan with water that was 40 plus degrees, just like the slush in Boston Harbor in years past that was sensationalized by media with ocean water that was 40 degrees plus. By the way, ocean water doesn't freeze till 28.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Why is there slush on that water? Chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. If you do not know about this technology, please investigate. Please don't roll your eyes and walk away because mainstream media tells you it isn't so. Please investigate. Use your common sense. We have not seen these phenomena before. That's because climate engineering is a recent phenomenon, recent decades. Consider that. If you saw something like this 10 or 15 years ago, it doesn't mean it wasn't from climate engineering, which, for the record, was fully deployed over 70 years ago. Moving on. From the UK Daily Mail and other sources, this sensationalized headline, which highlights exactly what the completely out of control climate engineering cabal is working around the clock to create. The climate engineers are also hard at work in the US. This new report from multiple sources. Polar vortex splits into three since Arctic air southward as eastern half of US gears up for bitterly cold weeks to come. From that report, as experts predicted, they're not predicting anything. This is the scheduled weather. I want to stop right there. This is the scheduled weather. We know that Raytheon is passing down the, quote, scheduled weather all the way to the local meteorologist. Raytheon does all the weather modeling for the illegally federal gag-ordered National Weather Service and NOAA employees, gagged weathermen, passing down the scheduled weather all the way to the local meteorologist. We know this from our Freedom of Information Act requests that we have gotten by suing the U.S. Department of Commerce to get them, our legal team. Scripts, they're all reading scripts. From this report, again, as experts predicted, polar vortex splits into three above Arctic Circle. This will push Arctic air southward, blanketing the eastern half of North America. Temperatures are likely to plummet in the coming days and weeks. The change will also likely result in disruptive snowstorms this winter. Kansas City, which is hosting the AFC Championship game between the hometown Chiefs and the New England Patriots on Sunday, will have a high temperature that day of just 15 degrees. Engineering exceptionally cold surface cool downs for major sports events helps the climate engineers to further sensationalize the effects of their operations. Something to remember. This is not natural. These events are not natural. They are engineered. As I've stated many times, for those who still refuse to investigate or doubt this, search Chinese scientists create engineered snowstorm. You'll learn a lot from Fox News and Popular Science that covered that. I want to keep repeating that because many people don't bother to investigate. Please investigate. Don't believe me. Please investigate. The Weather Channel paid disinformation actors this week, warning of, quote, flash freezing scenarios. Flash freezing, exactly what chemical ice nucleation for weather modification creates. Winter, weather, whiplash, flash freezing scenarios. Remember back to what once was decades ago and what now is. Very different. Winter storm, quote, Harper, is not as huge geographically as the Weather Channel propagandists would have us believe. It's a stretched out, unnatural strip of chemically ice nucleated winter weather targeting some of the most populated regions of the U.S. The engineered winter weather events, as stated, often coincide with major sports events, which helps the climate engineers, again, to sensationalize their activities. This completely engineered so-called winter storm Harper, is just the latest winter weather warfare atrocity to be inflicted on unknowing populations. The composition of the snow is now completely different in most cases, often extremely slick, due to the surfactants in the climate engineering dispersions. Surfactants like those found in soaps. It's part of the mix. We know that from the manufacturer's descriptions. American Elements Corporation. You can find that article on geoengineeringwatch.org as well. The foaming rain runoff is a telltale sign of the surfactants coming down on all of us. Snow is now often reported at far above freezing temperatures, even in the high 40s or even higher. Temperatures eventually lower on the surface as the ice nucleation process progresses. Now, the so-called winter storms also have a, quote, warm side to them. Really. And snow, now, all too often, has nothing to do with elevation. We are told that snow has to do with which side of the so-called winter storm you're on. And now there's almost always an ice storm event in the boundary zone between the, quote, warm side of the so-called winter storm and the cold side. This is from the chemical ice nucleating elements hitting the ground and then setting up. Please, again, don't believe anything I'm reporting on here. Please actually investigate chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. Patents, they have lab tests showing a demonstration of these elements in a lab that they freeze a beaker of water instantly in front of your face. Please investigate. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org, check our homepage, and examine the entire engineering winter section on the top toolbar of the homepage. With all the mainstream media Ministry of Propaganda hype about the engineered winter weather in the most populated regions of the U.S., how cold is it where it should be cold? Question mark. Unfortunately, it is much warmer than it should be in the polar regions. And that fact carries very dire ramifications. Here's a new headline report from National Geographic and other sources. Here's the headline: Some Arctic ground no longer freezing, even in winter. This is from January 16th. A new global study published in Nature Communications confirmed that permafrost is thawing quickly across much of the world. The greatest warming was seen in parts of Siberia. Significant warming was also seen in Antarctica. In much of the Arctic ground and tundra, temperatures increased because of rising average air temperatures. Already 3 of the last 4 years have been Earth's hottest on record, and the poles are actually warming far faster, with areas 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle in Norway reaching 90 degrees Fahrenheit this July. 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, 90 degrees. Do we hear that on our hyped up power structure owned propaganda sources like the Weather Channel? They're paid lying actors. That's what they are. Inexcusable for these people to deceive the public the way they are. And if the so-called experts at the Weather Channel want to challenge those assertions, or if others in academia want to challenge those assertions, please do so on a live, on-air setting. But we're not getting any takers anymore since Pacifica Radio in New York hosted debates between myself and several academicians, 2 of whom represented major science sources. And during these debates, I believe to the listener it would be quite evident that the official denial of climate engineering is not supportable. These are simply people in academia paid to deceive the public. That's what they're doing. If you want to see these debates, go to geoengineeringwatch.org. Search geoengineeringwatch.org debates, and you should find these debates. There are several. Back to this report on Arctic ground no longer freezing, as should be expected from the power structure-owned National Geographic source. They weave in the official false narrative that we shouldn't worry too much. Everything will probably all work itself out. Go back to sleep. That's the type of narrative we always see from official sources in the end. Pacify the populations. How long will so many bury themselves in such verifiably absurd lies of pacification? And for the record, who owns National Geographic? Fox News and corporate media mogul Rupert Murdoch. Consider the source. From South African News, times.co.za, this headline report that corporate propaganda media won't mention. What's really happening around the west of the world while engineered snowstorms are being whipped up, engineered winter weather whiplash on the most populated first world nations in the northern hemisphere. Here's what's happening in the rest of the world. The South African report, 31 homes destroyed, 28 damaged as Overberg counts cost of massive wildfires. South Africa. Does anybody hear anything about that here? No. Again, question, how many in U.S. populations have had any idea of the record wildfire incinerations that are occurring around the world? Here are more reports on the same theme. From the Sydney Morning Herald and other sources, this new alarming report: roads melt as temperatures break records across New South Wales. From the report, as temperature records continue to be broken across Australia, residents are warned the heat wave melting the state is yet to hit its peak, and in some parts is forecast to continue into the next week without respite. On Wednesday and Thursday, new maximum temperature records were set in 27 sites across New South Wales, while some of the hottest overnight temperatures on record worsened the impact of the ongoing hot spell. Why is it warmer at night? Because there is a layer of heat-trapping gases and climate engineering trapping even more heat. Nighttime temperatures rising twice as fastest daytime highs. The report continues, the conditions were so extreme that the asphalt on some local highways began melting about midday. Listen on, it gets worse. Authorities have begun using water from nearby rivers to cool the pavement. Australia, that's already mired in drought, climate engineering caused drought, are using some of their last water to cool the pavement. The report states authorities acknowledge water is a scarce resource at this time. However, it is required to ensure the safety of motorists and keep the roads open, a spokesman said in a statement. Final excerpt from the report. Meanwhile, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service was battling more than 50 fires across the state, many of them completely uncontained. Consider that. Using some of their last water to wet the surface of the roads to keep the roads from melting. Do we hear anything of this in the U.S.? Why doesn't the U.S. corporate media Ministry of Propaganda mention reports like this? Because their job is to keep the public ignorant and in the dark until the last possible moment, while further confusing populations in the U.S. with the latest engineered winter weather warfare, winter weather whiplash events in the U.S. and in Europe. Moving on, from the UK Guardian and other sources, yet another headline of the ongoing situation in Australia. Australia heatwave temperatures to soar in every state in the territory. On and on. It's not just Australia, South America experiencing much of the same. Another headline from the news site, thebigwobble.org, and other sources. This alarming report, yet more confirmation of the unfolding biosphere collapse. Another tipping point is breached. Salmon have disappeared in Scotland. Not a single salmon caught during the entire season. We stated this at geoengineeringwatch.org for how many years? Fisheries collapsing. Terrestrial ecosystems collapsing. Insects collapsing. And yet, what do we have the mainstream media, corporate propaganda, politicized radio talking heads or media talking heads discussing? Nothing but theater, theater and more theater, while the planet implodes around us. Not a single salmon caught in the Scottish season. What is our government and others doing about the rapidly unfolding biosphere collapse? They're doing their best, I'm sorry to say, to make it worse until nothing is left. From the news source heraldscotland.com and other sources, this new extremely alarming but ultimately not surprising new report. Here it is. Scientists point finger for mass whale deaths at rise in submarine war games. From the report, scientists fear the biggest victims of the new Cold War are an unprecedented number of whale deaths. Whales washed up on Scotland's shores in 2018. Experts have long warned that, quote, underwater military activity might, there we have that word again, I have so much disdain for, could, may, might. That's what the science community does. They don't tell it like it is. They're paid not to. They fear this underwater military activity might cause such deaths. Such concerns heightened late last summer as reported upsurge in war games in the Northeast Atlantic coincided with record beachings and dying of deep diving whale species. Now, new research has ruled out an alternative theory that a virus might have killed scores of Atlantic whales. Stop there for a moment. A virus. Are we really to believe that kind of nonsense when we have such an obvious cause and effect happening here? What paid liar so-called scientist came up with the virus theory? People will sell their honor in so many cases. Our honor and our virtue is the only thing we own, and how many in academia have sold it or given it away? Choosing to be tools of deception for the power structure. Let's hope that changes. If you're in academia, please start telling the truth. In regard to the mass die-off in the oceans, there are many factors. But let me take a moment to provide a quick reminder course on the U.S. Navy's needless and ruthless slaughter of marine mammals. Here's a few former reports. These are headline reports from multiple sources. U.S. Navy killing thousands of whales and dolphins with sonar. That's from collectiveevolution.com. Another headline report from sciencemagazine.org. Navy admits sonar is killing whales. Another headline report from orcanetwork.com. Navy sonar blasts whales. Another headline report from the UK Guardian. A deaf whale is a dead whale. U.S. Navy sonar impacts on whales. And there's this former report to consider from truthout.org and other sources. Navy allowed to kill or injure nearly 12 million whales, dolphins, and other marine animals in the Pacific. Here's an excerpt from the report. What if you were told the U.S. Navy is legally permitted to harass, injure, or kill nearly 12 million whales, dolphins, porpoises, sea lions, and seals across the North Pacific Ocean over a 5-year period? Question mark. It is unfortunately true, and over 1/4 of every tax dollar you pay is helping to fund it. A multi-state international citizen watchdog group called the West Coast Action Alliance tabulated numbers that came straight from the Navy's Northwest Training and Testing Environmental Impact Statement. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that's NOAA, letters of authorization for incident take of marine mammals issued by NOAA's National Marine Fisheries. Basically, a carte blanche approval to kill up to 12 million marine mammals for war games. Is it any wonder our oceans are dead? And it's not just the U.S. military, I understand that. There are countless sources from all over the globe. Russia has treated the ocean like a toxic dump center, just like the U.S. military, just like China, just like Japan, I could go on and on and on. Our oceans have been used as a toxic waste dump. The oceans die, we die, but make no mistake, just for war games, our own U.S. military has brought unbelievable death and destruction to our oceans. Unbelievable. Let's be clear for the record again, the U.S. government and the criminal cabal that runs it has absolutely no regard whatsoever for its soldiers, its citizens, or any part of the web of life, including, as I just outlined, the oceans. This statement of conclusion is not political, as what I have just outlined applies to countless former administrations of all political stripes. It applies to countless countries, ours being the biggest violator of all, because of the size of our military. The political facade is nothing more than a political theater. And how many are even now completely caught up in it? And all the while, the last remnants of this once thriving planet are being looted, plundered, and pillaged till there is nothing left. On that note, from the news site statesmanjournal.com and other sources, this new but not surprising report. The current administration moves to open Oregon and Washington coast to oil drilling. From that report, the 5-year plan is the largest expansion of offshore drilling in U.S. history, making 90% of the outer continental shelf available for exploration and development. It would reverse decades-long bans that protect the West Coast from oil and gas drilling and open drilling in new areas of the Arctic, Atlantic Ocean, and Gulf of Mexico. Let's stop here for a moment to clarify what's happening around the world. Completely insane military exercises, operations, and expansions are decimating millions of the last remaining marine creatures. And of course, the military-industrial complex must have fuel to continue such activities. The industrialized nation populations must be kept pacified by cheap, abundant energy till the last possible moment. So the cancerous pillaging of our planet continues completely unabated. On that note, let's hear what presidential appointee Ryan Zinke has to say about the all-out plundering plan, the offshore drilling. The same Ryan Zinke that propagates the official lie that forests are incinerating at unprecedented rates because we are simply not cutting down enough trees. Again, that's a blatant lie which geoengineeringwatch.org has exposed multiple times in multiple informational posts. Here's what Zinke had to say, quote, "Responsibly developing our energy resources on the outer continental shelf in a safe and well-regulated way is an important factor for our economy and energy security. It provides billions of dollars to fund the conservation of our coastlines, public lands, and parks," U.S. Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke said, announcing the decision. What a blatant, glaring lie. That this money is going to fund preservation? How ridiculous a statement is that? How long will people buy this while our planet implodes around us? Individuals like Ryan Zinke are nothing more than part of the power structure criminal cabal. The swamp's not being drained. That's an absurd notion. It's being filled with criminal after criminal, billionaire after billionaire. It gets worse from one administration to the next. They're all criminals. It's worse and worse all the time. It's worse now than it has ever been before. Ever. I want to move on to this related headline. Yet more verification that those in power intend to loot, plunder, and pillage and burn every drop of oil until our once thriving planet is a lifeless ball of rock. And climate engineering is one of the primary means by which those in power are able to confuse and divide populations, especially first world populations, on the true state of biosphere collapse until the last possible moment. Engineering winter weather events. This is winter weather warfare. It's nothing short of biological warfare due to the highly toxic elements being used to engineer these events. They are doing this, again, to confuse and divide populations until the last possible moment on the true state of biosphere collapse. They're doing this to retain their power, to retain business as usual. And so far it has worked. We need to reverse this trend. Again, if you believe these winter weather events are normal and natural, you have not investigated. I plead with you. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org, top toolbar, and search engineering winter. Go through the entire section. Understand that these winter weather events are not natural. They're increasingly desperate, increasingly unnatural. Many that even don't want to believe something's going on in our skies are now starting to have to face the fact that the train is very off the rails. The weather is completely unraveling, and climate engineering is further fueling the fire. It's not the only factor, as many people would like to believe. Any form of human activity that damages the biosphere, that alters the energy balance of the planet, is a problem. It's a form of geoengineering. But the intentional climate intervention programs, the most threatening and deadly of all, must be addressed by anyone, everyone, who claims to care about the environment, who claims to care about the future of our children and the web of life. We must address this issue. Again, there can be no legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without addressing climate engineering first and foremost. Back to the military-industrial complex, pushing to keep business as usual by their looting and plundering of remaining resources on the planet. This headline. Again, yet more verification that those in power intend to continue their decimation of the planet until every last drop of oil is burnt. This headline from the Times of India and other sources. Saudi Arabia to set up 10 billion oil refinery in Pakistan. From that report, Saudi Arabia wants to make Pakistan's economy development stable through establishing an oil refinery in partnership with Pakistan and China and the Pakistan Economic Corridor. There is no sustainable development. Let me make that abundantly clear. There is no such thing as sustainable development on a finite planet with finite resources. How incredibly clear should that be? And when we are burning through 100 million barrels of oil every single day, how can anyone not understand how radically that's affecting the economy and how much of that is going into flying the aircraft that are spraying the particulates in our sky to mask and hide some of the warming with highly toxic chemicals, and in doing so, actually further fueling the overall warming. Again, like the pharmaceutical industrial cure for the human body. Take this particular pharmaceutical industrial complex so-called cure for a particular symptom, and then they tell you about the 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 other horrific side effects you're going to get from this so-called cure, and then there's another long list of pharmaceuticals you have to take to deal with those side effects. That's the same mentality we're dealing with here. The military-industrial complex of cancer throughout the globe, because countries around the globe are colluding and cooperating on climate engineering, make no mistake about it, all for their own purposes. We must wake global population to what's going on in our skies. We have very, very little time left. I can't stress that point strongly enough. Moving on. While the planet and its life support systems virtually implode on every front, the military-industrial juggernaut of destruction and insanity continues to focus on not only acquiring oil, but building bigger and better weapons of mass destruction to patrol Earth's rapidly dying seas. Consider this new headline from DefenseNews.com. U.S. Navy moves toward unleashing killer robot ships on the world's oceans. The grand vision for the surface fleet, which includes at least 4 new platforms called large surface combatants and the medium and large unmanned surface combatants, smaller units, leaves a lot of questions about what the Navy is currently buying and whether it can afford to perform its missions while buying a pair of aircraft carriers, we really need those, and a new class of ballistic missile submarines, and 10 new Flight 3 guided missile destroyers, not to mention the F-35s that they're buying. This is an insane asylum we are now living in, with Earth's life support systems again being relentlessly attacked and collapsing from every direction. The criminals that run the government and the militaries are only focused on funneling every remaining bit of Earth's once abundant resources into making and deploying more weapons of mass destruction. With all this in mind, consider this new report from truthout.org. Here's the title: In Facing Mass Extinction, We Must Allow Ourselves to Grieve, from Truthout, a site that claims to care about the environment, claims to tell the truth about the environment. I've communicated briefly with the author of this report in the past. He said he would soon address the climate engineering issue, however, he never did. Now it seems that instead of facing and acknowledging the full truth, first and foremost including the single most destructive environmental factor of all, climate engineering, the author of this report from Truthout has settled for skipping the whole truth and going straight to giving up. The vast majority of academia continues to betray the human race, and indeed the entire web of life, by their cowardly denial of the climate engineering factor. If you're a member of academia and you're listening to this broadcast, please, as I have pleaded with you over and over, please find your courage. Tell the truth. If you're an elected official or a member of an agency tasked with protecting the public, please tell the truth while it can still make a difference. It's only over when we collectively give up. This we must never do. Though the horizon looks dim indeed, if we could expose and halt the climate engineering insanity, if we can expose it, we can stop it. If we can stop it, we can yet make a difference. This would be the greatest leap forward we could make collectively. And I need to state this. How hollow and propagandistic was the latest scripted speech from the current occupant of the White House? And in this speech, the hollow claims that the welfare of the American public is a, quote, top priority. Really? What a statement of unimaginable deception. All the while, the American public is being willfully and aggressively exposed to highly toxic elements from every imaginable direction, starting with the inescapable climate engineering fallout. Then, of course, there is forced vaccinations, toxic foods, the 5G rollout of total insanity, decimated ecosystems. Make no mistake about this. This is a mathematical, statistical fact. We will not be here much longer on the current course. Those that are still caught up in the manufactured political theater, please, please wake up. As the walls close in, as the current paradigm can no longer be maintained, those in power will certainly reveal just how desperate and insane they truly are. Manufactured false flag attacks that are used as a premise to trigger global conflict, increasing biological attacks on unsuspecting populations, which has long since been occurring, and which the climate engineering operations must be considered a part of due to the highly toxic fallout which we are all breathing, which we are exposed to with every breath we take. Consider that this already toxic brew can easily be made much more lethal at any point in time of the power structure's choosing. Will those in power allow the population to fully awaken to what has been done to them by their so-called governments? Or will those in power play their final cards before the wake-up can fully occur? We will soon enough see. As dark as the horizon looks, consider that if the collective efforts of those that are already awake could wake the masses before the power structure is fully ready for that to happen, we could yet alter the outcome. Most importantly, we must wake our military brothers and sisters to what they are a part of, to what they are participating in. And this does not just apply to the U.S. military, but others around the globe. Though currently the U.S. military is being used as the greatest disrupting and destabilizing force on the planet, as those in power use the U.S. military as a mercenary force to pursue global hegemonic power. Where do we go from here? That yet depends on what we collectively do or don't do. Will we stand by as idle witnesses to the last days of life on earth? Or will we resolve ourselves to make every single day count in this epic battle for the greater good? Indeed, a battle to save life on earth. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Detailed activist instructions can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. The most effective way to wake others is to share credible data from a credible source. Make every day count. Make your voice heard. Never give up. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.